actual crystal spaceships with Alex Tsakiris and Bruce Fenton on Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons and monsters and serpents, to Brothers of the Serpent podcast, coming to you not live from the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science, nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed high atop the Edwards Plateau. And we are once again doing weird time traveling stuff. The podcast is over, and we're recording this last. So we have already talked about all the stuff you're going to hear later.
That's right.
So yeah, this episode is a special sort of a Swapcast with Alex Tsakiris from Skeptiko and Bruce Fenton, who wrote the books Into Africa and Exogenesis. So Kyle and I are very interested in his human origin stuff, and of course I kind of did a deep dive into exogenesis before doing this episode. But Alex was running the show on this one because we were doing a Swapcast, and basically we did it with him. So he does it in his Skeptiko way, and he plays some clips, very interesting stuff. He also has a kind of documentary that him and Bruce made about the contents of Bruce's books that he references in the show, and I think that's available on YouTube. You guys can probably find it by looking up Skeptiko, or it's called 780,000. I think is what it's called. So lots of interesting stuff, and we will get into that later. But first, let's go ahead and do space weather news. From spaceweather.com, Venus at maximum brightness. If you can wake up before sunrise only once this month, make it July 10th. On Friday morning, Venus will be at its maximum brightness, magnitude 4.7. That's 30 times brighter than Sirius, the brightest star in the sky. Bonus, wow. Venus will be less than 2 degrees from red giant star. I don't know how to say the name. Aldebaran, something like that. Probably not getting it right. Bonus number 2, Comet Neowise is nearby as well. So Comet Neowise is not yet a great comet. It is, however, really good. Capital R, capital G. Rising just before the sun, Neowise is visible to the naked eye and has a tail at least 5 degrees long. Man, look at that picture of it.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. Jeremy Perez sends this picture from Merriam Crater east of Flagstaff, Arizona. So if you wake up early, we can see this in the morning here. Man. On any given morning, Perez says, this old cinder cone is perfect. Catching it and sharing the horizon with this graceful comet gets kind of goosebumpy for me, he says. Comet Neowise is currently shining about as brightly as a second magnitude star. Its core and part of its tail are easily naked eye objects from dark, clear sights.
Awesome.
Framed by the colors of sunrise, it is arguably the most beautiful comet in many years. But the last truly great comet was Hale-Bopp in 97, shining 10 times brighter than Comet Neowise does now. Hale-Bopp was visible to the unaided eye for an astonishing 18 months, and its tail stretched as much as 45 degrees across the sky. Comet Neowise does not yet come close to those thresholds of splendor. Sometimes, though, a really good comet is enough. Wake up before sunrise and take a look.
That's going to happen.
Yes.
Heck yeah.
Now I'm going to definitely have to do that. Current conditions. Solar wind speed, 345.5 kilometers per second. The density is medium to high, 7.7 protons per cubic centimeter. We are 74% of 2020 spotless days. And let's see, the neutron counts. Today is 9.9% above the space age average count of neutrons, which they rate as a high neutron count. So,
watch out.
That's right.
Stay safe out there. Wear your neutron hat.
Does sunblock protect against neutrons?
Dude, that's a great, neutron block.
Okay, we got some. I got a lot of listener communications to get in here.
But first, from space.com, just real quick.
Yeah.
The monstrous blobs near Earth's core may be even bigger than we thought. Dun-dun-dun-dun.
A monstrous blob.
Yep. Deep within the Earth, where the solid mantle meets the molten outer core, strange continent-sized blobs of hot rock jut out for hundreds of miles in every direction. These underground mountains go by the names thermochemical piles, or large low shear velocity provinces, LLSVPs, or just sometimes the blobs. Geologists don't know much about where these blobs came from or what they are, but they do know that they are gargantuan. The two biggest blobs, which sit deep below the Pacific Ocean in Africa, account for nearly 10% of the entire mantle's mass.
Whoa.
One 2016 study found. And if they sat on Earth's surface, the duo would each extend about 100 times higher than Mount Everest. However, new research suggests even these lofty analogies may be underestimating just how big the blobs really are. In a study published in June 12th in the journal Science, researchers analyzed the seismic waves generated by earthquakes over nearly 30 years. They found several massive, never-before-detected features along the edges of the Pacific blob. These structures we located are thousands of kilometers across in scale. Lead study author Doyeon Kim, a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Maryland, told Live Science in an email. According to Kim, that's an order of magnitude larger than typical features found along the blob's edge. And they did some, I don't know if it's modeling or whatever, with algorithms and stuff, and found that these blobs, like the large portions that jut outward, are positioned under the like highly volcanically active areas of the Earth's surface. So they're thinking that they play a part in volcanic activity on the surface somehow. But huge blobs.
Thermochemical piles.
Yeah.
Band name.
Yeah.
Turns out geology has lots of great band name material.
It does. And whoever made the comment to stop saying quote,
unquote,
when reading stories, thank you.
Yeah.
Because it totally works a lot better. And I've been failing to do that properly ever since the beginning of this podcast. So won't happen again.
Yeah, it is
Appreciate
better.
the advice.
Yeah. Okay, so we got some reviews here on the our iTunes reviews. Love. This one's called Love. I love this podcast. 5 stars. From Mithrindir 3.
All right, thanks.
Yeah. Plumb the Mysteries, listen to the show. This one is called. It says, I must have come across this show because of either a Randall Carlson reference or interview. All time here is well worth it if you despair that when you question the standard model of scholarship that no one will take you serious, named after the star, then dive deep into the ancient mysteries and modern fascinations, archaeology, archaeoastronomy, secret societies, scriptards, butt flaps, and dog stars. It is all here into your feed. When the future archaeologists sift the sands of our time, I definitely want them to find this treasure trove. Thanks for all of it.
I appreciate that.
That's from David.
Serious.
David Getson.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, buddy.
Thanks, buddy. I didn't realize that was from David until This one's called Sweet Merciful Crap. This podcast is awesome. The title pretty much sums up my entire review. Keep rocking snacks from Sling Dog 69. This one's called OMFG Greatest Ancient Mysteries and Other Mysteries Show Ever. Recently discovered Snake Bros in the past few months, and now I am completely caught up. I never imagined that there would be such a smart and entertaining show covering the questionable areas of accepted model of science and history. The only problem is that I have listened to all the episodes now. I'm going to need you guys to start cranking out 1 or 2 of these each day, including holidays, or else I might start going into shock from lack of 30% brain expansion. That's from JP09 via Apple Podcasts US. Thank you. Lack of 30% brain expansion. Okay, this one's called There's Not Enough Stars, said no one ever until now. 10 stars. If you're curious, but you don't know what about, this is the podcast for you. These snakes are the perfect blend of cosmos and comedy. They address ancient mysteries with an eye towards the common paradigm, allowing you to see for yourself how everything, everywhere, is wrong all the time. And when listening to the brothers figure out the universe becomes too slow for you, just join the Discord and give them the answers we all seek directly. If in-depth discussions about things that no one will talk to you is your thing, tune in to these truth seekers and join their discussions. Snakes! That's from the Bronze.
So true about the Discord. Man.
Yeah, the Discord is the place
Roll in
to go.
there, and you're just like, man, I have no idea what so much stuff going on in here.
Yeah. This one's called Support the Show, 5 stars, review the show. Thank you. This one's The End is Near. Joe Rogan Experience to Graham Hancock to Randall Carlson, sprinkle in some John Anthony West and Robert Schock to Suspicious Observers. At the bottom of the rabbit hole, I found Douglas Vogt and the Diehold Foundation to Cosmographia to Snakes. Keep up the good work, bros. This has become my go-to podcast for all things ancient, mythological, and cataclysmic. From Moses Was a Bronze Age Man via Apple Podcasts.
Thanks.
Thank you. Moses was a Bronze Age man. All right, this one's called Challenges Everything You Thought You Knew. Whether working out, checking out, or just being out, this is the podcast to which you'll listen to time and time again. It challenges your understanding or lack thereof of history, philosophy, archaeology, astronomy, and any other Y-ending discipline you can imagine, along with a peppering of physics. Other than politics, nothing is beyond the ancient pale. If your interests are diverse and your mind is seeking a 30% expansion, give the Snake Brothers a try. You even get to Crayola your very own certificates of ignorance. Oh, that's from Anne. Alberta Ann from Canada. Thank you guys so much. Those are great reviews. All right, emails. Got a few emails to read here. This one's a Patreon message from Michael. He says, Snacks! Thanks for all you guys do, especially getting Randall's work in one place. Is that actually humanly possible? Hope to one day make it out to a road trip that you all do. Till then, peace and snakes from New England, land of granite. That's from Patreon. He's a Patreon supporter. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This one's from Oliver, also a Patreon message. Hey, Snake people, would like to extend my gratitude to the both of yous for what I have previously taken for free. Now that I am a shareholder, I would like to say don't change a goddamn thing. I'm still working the back catalog, but holy shit, this is good. Can't wait to meet y'all in the field someday. Brett, you're a badass. Cheers, Oliver.
Thank you, buddy.
Thank you. Oh, he's Carbuncle in the chats. Okay, I know who that is. He's in the Discord. Okay, this is from Eric, who also recently joined the Discord. This is a comment on episode 111, Anomalies. The Anomalies episodes, part 1. He says, sounds to me like extraterrestrials are just trying to restock planet Earth. They have problems just like we do. Sometimes their GPS doesn't work and they drop water animals over land. Whoops! Or it could be a new delivery driver dropping stuff off at the wrong location. Either way, love the podcast. Now we're part 2.
Space Fishbergs.
Space Fishbergs.
Delivered fresh from Tiamat.
That's right. Okay, this is from John, the Uncle John, who sent us the butt flaps. He says, Snake Bros, I just wanted to tell you about a possible option concerning the items we sent. After looking at many pictures on the subject, including scenes from the 10 Commandments, we noticed that the workers wore more of a wrap than a flap. It was also better for Meg to build them this way to ensure they fit you. But having said that, there is no reason you couldn't take some scissors and cut slits on the sides for more of a flap effect. We're totally cool with any modifications you would want to make. Once again, I hope these are acceptable. It sure was a long, drawn-out process for something so simple. I'm sorry they took so long to get. Uncle John. Yeah, who knew?
Hey, this is a great point.
Yeah, butt flaps are hard to make.
Extremely advanced butt flaps.
Let's see here. Okay, this is from Richard. It's called Snake Gents Love the Podcast and Consensus Challenging Themes. First off, a big thanks for creating an awesome suite of podcasts on consensus challenging themes. My old interest and career in prehistoric archaeology and paleo environmental changes is well and truly rekindled. I came across your show through Randall Carlson's work on Cosmographia, and I thoroughly enjoy every episode. Way back when I was a field archaeologist, largely following the Skeptard's take on humanity's prehistory, though thankfully I had awesome teachers like Professor Mike Bailey. who championed coherent catastrophism when I did my undergrad and postgrad degrees in archaeology and paleoecology, with tree ring analysis thrown in for good measure. Both undergrad and postgrad research introduced me to the questioning the Scriptard's view on abrupt Earth changes. So coming across the 2007 paper by West and Kinnett and company blew my mind. The perspective on the possibility that relatively advanced pre-Holocene seafaring cultures existed is far more open these days. Keep doing what you're doing, gents. Best regards, Richard.
Wow.
Man, thank you so much.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Glad you're enjoying our show and Cosmographia. And yes, this stuff, I agree that the way it opens up the possibilities. Why is there a resistance to that? I don't understand. It seems so cool that it would open up the possibility of that human history is far more interesting and complicated than we've ever thought.
Rewriting textbooks is hard. I don't know.
Let's see. This is from... I don't even want to try to mispronounce this name. How would you pronounce that? He's from the Czech Republic. Guillermo?
Guillermo. We're going with that.
Yeah. Hi from Prague, Czech Republic. Hi, Snakes. Just wanted to say hi from Prague, Czech Republic. I've been a follower over a year now. My journey was Joe Rogan to Graham Hancock to Randall, then to you. Love the show. Keep it up. We'll donate as soon as finances are sound after getting a bit hit from COVID. Cheers to all three snakes. Guillermo. Thank you.
Cheers, buddy.
Cheers. Czech Republic.
Sorry for the butchering of the name.
Yeah. This is a comment on episode 154, Correspondence in Physics. It says, no complaints from me about non-pyramid shows. I enjoy the variety. So clearly you are not one of the stick to the pyramids crowd. Thank you.
Yeah, we need the support.
Yeah. Stick to the pyramids people get really mad at us.
Feel the pressure.
Okay, this is the bad poetry inspired by the Serpentine brothers from Anne. So I think we read her poetry before. She says, hello, Serpentine siblings. Alberta Ann here. Okay, so I also read one of her reviews.
Okay.
Yeah. And on the last show, we read her poetry.
Yeah.
On your last podcast, number 154, you read out my bad poetry that you inspired me to write. I'm sorry to say that your reading made a bad poem truly worse, but I laughed so hard I fell off my corner of the flat earth. I'm chuffed to little mint balls to report I bounced right back on account of the elastic universe. I've heard a variety of your listeners ask your recommendations for interesting sites to visit. Might I recommend Kenneth L. Feder's Archaeological Oddities, a field guide to 40 claims of lost civilization, ancient visitors, and other strange sites in North America. I qualify this recommendation in that the author is a total Scriptard, but the sites he discusses are fascinating in and of their own right, and it never hurts to obtain the standard model view to descriptify. Laughing and learning with you, never at you, Alberta Ann. P.S. Kyle, on a previous podcast, you asked us listeners, what is wrong with us if we're listening and not leaving you a review? See, I think some people confuse us. That was definitely me saying that.
Yeah.
I'm the one that's like, what's wrong with you? Leave a review. I'm Russ.
I know what's wrong with you. I don't need to ask that question. It's the same thing that's wrong with me because I'm terrible with the...
Yeah, we don't leave enough reviews on podcasts we love. Too.
Yeah, just trying to get better about the Discord. It's just communicating with you guys, and I'm not good at it.
Yeah. So she's saying this, but she's talking to me. So on a previous podcast, you asked us what's wrong with us if we're listening and not leaving a review. She says, profound question. And once I've paid my therapist, I'll be sure to let you know. In the meantime, I've left you a 5-star review on iTunes. You brothers are worth every star. Thank you so much. Yeah. And we just read it. PPS, sorry for the Anglophile expressions. However, since the Brits lost the U.S. colonies, your language has really taken a deep dive into some godforsaken rabbit hole.
We want to be different.
We speak American on this podcast. Stop using all those dang Brit sayings. Nobody knows what they mean. Let's see here. State Fair. Greetings. Yeah, this is from Drew. Greetings, Snake Bros. I have recently become a huge fan of your podcast. I've always been interested in ancient mysteries and the like, but started seriously studying this type of material after reading Fingerprints of the Gods in 2012. I first heard about y'all when someone mentioned your podcast in the Earth Ancients Facebook group. Oh. I found your site and decided to give a listen. For whatever reason, I decided to start with the Gods of Eden episode, and I was instantly hooked. Your ability to present such heavy material in an approachable and entertaining manner is a real gift. I have since gone on to catch up on many of your back episodes and really enjoyed the Epic of Gilgamesh, The Sign and the Seal, and the episode with Walter Bosley. I have frankly loved all of your episodes. On a side note, I heard you mention in several of your episodes that you have an orchard, so I want to mention something you may find of interest. I run an urban farming program for the great state fair of Texas called the Big Tex Urban Farms.
Oh.
We grow produce in raised beds on a concrete parking lot and also in hydroponic greenhouse facilities at the state fairgrounds in Dallas. We donate 100% of the food we grow to nonprofit groups in the southern Dallas food desert. We also have educational programs and outreach as well. I also want to mention that I have been on a guest on many farming podcasts, and I once hosted my own gardening podcast many years ago with a friend. I only mention that to say that I know how much work goes into producing a show, and my hat is off to you for sure. Thank you so much for making such a great show, and if you ever find yourself in Dallas, give me a holler. I would love to meet y'all and give you a tour of my farm. I look forward to many more episodes. Sincerely, Drew.
Man.
Thank you.
Heck yeah, buddy.
Yeah.
Get together and talk about some farming. Hilology.
Hilology. All right, this one is final email here. This one's called Skeptiko with Tsakiris from Patrick, Mr. Hicks.
Ah, the patron saint.
That's right, the patron saint. Snake family. Just wanted to take a quick moment and acknowledge your recent podcast with Tsakiris. I've said something in the Discord, which is a Noah's flood of information, funny opinions, and banter. If you aren't on, slither over, but the way Tsakiris got you guys to open up, and I'm specifically referencing Kyle going over his spiritual journey, was maybe the most special moment for me in all that you have done. I can only speak for myself, but I have a suspicion that many of the Snake Force have a similar experience, and hearing a snake open up about it and reaffirm that the rest of us aren't crazy, or at the worst, we are all the same type of crazy, the only appropriate response is to just say, thank you. I will remember that the way that episode made me feel for the rest of my life. Keep showing everyone that acknowledging your certificate of ignorance is not a bad thing. P.S. I gotta say something about Dr. Keating. Had the privilege of communicating with him on top of him sending me a space rock. However he was perceived, in my experience, he's a genuinely nice guy. Patrick.
Awesome, man. I appreciate your input on that. And that comment really makes me feel great. But warm and fuzzies all the way. Yeah. So, I was kind of wondering about that after that episode was over. I was like, man, I don't know. Never really talk about that sort of thing on podcasts.
Yeah.
But yeah, all fear's gone. Thank you, sir.
All right, one last thing here. You guys remember the brew pastor sent us a bunch of beers. In that box was a school project report that his daughter did. I think her name is Lila. Isn't that how he said he'd pronounce it? It looks like Lilia, but I think he said it's pronounced Lila, right?
I can't remember, but man. Sounds good.
Yeah,
I think you're right.
So it's a project that she did on the Sphinx. So I just want to read this, and like it's like an email here. The Sphinx of Giza by Lila White. The Sphinx of Giza is on the Giza Plateau in Egypt next to 3 famous pyramids called the Pyramids of Giza. It is also next to the Nile River. The Sphinx is a statue of a pharaoh named Khafre, and his head is carved into a lion's body. He did this to show off. I learned that some people think cats were special to Egyptians. This is why Khafre's head was in a lion's body. For most of the Sphinx's life, it was buried, so you could only see his face. Some people think that at first, the Sphinx wasn't the Sphinx. They think he was a lion first. They think this because his head is too small and at an angle, and his body is a lion. Most people think the Sphinx is about 4,500 years old. Other people think it is 9,000 years old. I think the Sphinx is at least 9,000 years old because the erosion on the body is really bad. The erosion was caused by rainfall. Geologist and Professor Robert Schoch supports my idea. He says that the amount of rain to make it erode as much as it did, it had to be a long time ago. Man,
that's awesome.
Fantastic report on the Sphinx.
Yes. And you have true scientists backing up your theory.
That's right.
Really awesome.
That's right. Backed up by true science.
Very cool.
Yeah, thanks so much for sending us that. We really enjoyed it. And all the emails, all the reviews. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah.
So, ready to get into the Swapcast?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right.
So I will be editing this after this recording, and I'm not sure where it's going to begin, but this is our Swapcast with Alex from Skeptiko and Bruce Fenton.
Welcome to Skeptiko, where we explore controversial science and spirituality with leading researchers, thinkers, and their critics. I'm your host, Alex Tsakiris, and today we welcome back Bruce Fenton to Skeptiko. Bruce is the author of Exogenesis, Hybrid Humans, A Scientific History of the Extraterrestrial Genetic Manipulation, and also The Forgotten Exodus, the Into Africa Theory of Human Evolution, with a foreword by Graham Hancock, which is quite impressive. And because I thought Bruce's work was so fantastic, innovative, and important, as you know, if you listen to that first interview that I did with him, he's also featured in this upcoming, not even upcoming, it's out. That's what we're going to talk about today. This extended video / movie we did called 780,000, Our Alien Origin Story, which is available right now. You can go watch it on YouTube for free. It's soon going to be on Amazon as well, if we can ever get it up on that platform, which is, I don't know, they're saying they need more time. So give them all the time they need. And we're also joined today by Russ and Kyle Allen, the creators and hosts of Brothers of the Serpent podcast. Just a very, very cool show. You know, I was on their show recently, and I really, really enjoyed the way these guys dig into this. We have kind of a similar perspective on it, although they are much more well-versed in kind of these ancient mysteries kind of things. So I thought it'd be great to have them on along with Bruce and kind of do like a little launch party for this video, 780,000, and for Bruce's excellent book, you know, an opportunity to get on and talk about some stuff. And we were all just having a chat, you know, before we hit tape rolling, and it was super. There's so many interesting things to get to. So Bruce, first of all, to you, welcome back. Thanks for joining me. We've talked so many times during the making of this film, and it's been just great working with you. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having us back on, and thanks for working with us on the film production. Yeah, you're really cool.
Yeah, it was really cool. It was really great. And you know, my only regret is Danny, your wife, and your co-researcher on this had such a great contribution. And I think people will get that from reading the book, and they'll maybe know. And I think it also maybe comes in the interview you did and that we referenced to it. But she's awesome. And it was just so cool getting to know her as well. So
we'll talk her into doing some sort of video chat with you or something, or, you know, so that she can give you her overview another time as well.
That's good. I like sneak that in. That's how we're going to do it. Hey, and then Russ and Kyle, I want you guys to, hey, I don't know if you can see this, but I am wearing
look at that.
my snake t-shirt in honor of you guys, and the hat just to trigger anyone who could possibly be triggered by the American flag. I didn't have any agenda. I just put a flag on one of my hats, but I know that's still going to trigger people. So you guys, so cool having you here. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. Looking forward to this interview.
Yeah, it was a blast having you on our show, Alex, and we're really glad to be here on Skeptiko with Bruce.
It's very cool to connect with you all.
So Bruce, do you want to take it from the top, if you will, on, you know, these two books, what they're about, for someone who really doesn't know, is just kind of dropping into this conversation, kind of a quick overview of what's going on with these two books that you wrote, Exogenesis, and this Into Africa book, which I know you wrote a few years ago, but I think is like such a great, important piece of this puzzle as well. And we're going to play some clips from 780,000 that will highlight that, but just kind of the overview for the uninitiated.
Sure. Just bear in mind that my quick overview sometimes is about 60 hours long on any topic.
Right. True.
But no, I'll try and condense it down. But the two books do sort of connect. You know, the Into Africa book really was part of a project that I got involved with where I went to a site out in the jungles in Ecuador. The site was rather mysterious. It wasn't clear who built it. There were indications based on nearby archaeology that it could relate to the Lagoa Santa people. Now, they are known from sites down in Brazil, notably the Lagoa Santa site, but also a number of other sites across Brazil and even in other areas as well, I believe across the borders. Yeah, the site in Ecuador in the Yanganasis jungle really indicated to me that there'd been likely a civilization there earlier than 5,000 years ago, possibly going back, I suspect, 12,000 years. Now, the Lagoa Santa would fit that pretty well because we know that they have sites going back at least 20, 30, depending on who you ask, perhaps 40, 50,000 years ago. There have been finds across parts of central Ecuador, including like Baños de Agua Santa, which is near the town nearest to this site, that have, cave sites where they have found remains that appear to be Lagoa Santa. So we know that for some reason, these people had trekked up through the jungles of Brazil, up through the Amazon and into Ecuador. And so I believe there's a whole lost story there, of civilization throughout the jungles. I mean, obviously, there's all sorts of legends about lost cities in the Amazon jungle. We know they're not just stories because some of these are getting found, as well as mound sites and all sorts of other constructions. In fact, we know that the Amazon jungle is essentially seems to be a sort of a market garden that went wild. There's a lot of trees and plants, and that suggest that it was, in some respects, deliberately planted in parts, and then it went kind of wild. Now, this indicator of the Lagoa Santa led me into the work of the Into Africa work, because it turns out these are a kind of Australoid people, or they appear to be of morphology of Australian Aboriginals or Papuans. Now, what are these people doing down in South America 20,000, 30,000 years ago? Obviously, that is an implicit argument against the prevailing models of how America was first inhabited. So when you sort of dig deeper into that, you have to kind of explain, well, how are these people in the Americas so early if we have an out of Africa story with 55,000 years ago, modern humans first emerging from Eastern Africa, populating Eurasia, eventually reaching Australia and then the Americas. And then conversely, if it turns out that you've got modern humans in the Americas 40,000 years ago and that they're Aboriginal type people, that really doesn't fit.
Okay, so hold on. Let me interject with a clip from the movie.
An incredible leap forward in technology, which happens to appear 70,000 years ago in East Africa, exactly where we have these new haplogroups. Indeed, we also have the first complex mobile art, some of these carved stone pieces that have become famous in the Blombos Caves region and elsewhere. There's very obviously a cultural shift underway, which fits diffusion rather than sudden emergence. This is precisely what the genetic data is telling us. That a new paper has just come out, in fact, about a week ago, and they have found that the Y chromosomal lineages of all Eurasian people points to a migration out of Southeast Asia and East Asia 55,000 years ago. Where's Africa in that story, right? This is hugely problematic. A 2018 paper looking at the mtDNA, the mitochondrial lineages, they found that the oldest variants of haplogroups M and N, which are considered foundational to all modern Eurasian people, those turn out to be in Aboriginal Australians, right? Nowhere near the Middle East, nowhere near where they think that these new haplogroups are appearing, in East Africa and the Middle East. So you've now got the female and male lineages seeming to arise somewhere in Oceania or East Asia.
Okay, I'll pause it there. We could go on and on. I love the way you present this stuff. And we were chatting, like all of us were chatting. And I really like the point that Russ made about he appreciated the sciencey part of it. And I did too. From the first time we talked, it's like, that's the barrier. Those are the shields that are up. It's like, this guy's coming out with some pretty wild sounding stuff, like the whole out of Africa thing is total bunk, and all the best science doesn't prove that to me, show that to me. And I really kind of lay it out. Okay, I'll prove it to you. Here it goes. Do you want to elaborate on that? Either one of you guys, Russ or Kyle?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not as familiar with his Out of Africa book. The one that I've studied the most is the Exogenesis one. So some of this information is newer to me. But what I was specifically speaking about was, in your book, you sort of intertwine the intuitive information with, and then you go digging for the data. Now, I found that a fascinating way to do the research, but it's harder for me to like, you say, okay, so we have these ideas, or this person had this dream, or this other thing, and then you go looking for information and you find it in the scientific data. That was the part that I found fascinating. So that's basically what I was meaning when I was saying that I had a harder problem with the intuitive part. But then once you got into the science, I'm like, okay, there we go. So.
Fair enough. Kyle, do you have any thoughts on the out of Africa part of that? Because, in this larger story that we're going to tell in this interview and in this film, is Exogenesis, is this story of our human origins are traceable by science that Bruce has discovered to 780,000 years ago. And to me, that kind of shifts our focus. It's not just like a date. It like totally changes the paradigm that we would be contemplating. Even some of the crises that we're going through now, it kind of forces you to shift your focus and say, wow, how does this really fit in? And I think it also, that's why I wanted to start with the out of Africa thing, is we get hung up on Africa and the migration out of Africa, 70,000 years ago or whatever? Bruce is talking about 780,000 years, if we ever let him get to that story. But first, Kyle, do you have any thoughts, or have you ever looked into the Africa, out of Africa, into Africa? Because Bruce's thing is like, look, if you really are honest about looking at the data, there's a movement out of Africa, but it's after a movement into Africa. So these people were escaping from a ecological disaster and they moved into Africa. And then you guys picked up the trail later on when they moved out, and you said, oh, that's it. That's the event and then he goes and finds all this archaeological data that predates that. And he goes, well, then obviously that was just the second leg of the journey. So I don't know, Kyle, have you looked into that at all, or do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, just a little bit. I think generally there are some obvious problems with it just based on some of the stories that I've followed, but the genetic trail is something that's really hard for me to wrap my brain around, how they follow this genetic trail. But there's been some pretty recent stories where they're finding stuff in Europe and saying, wait, how is this possible? Our story about the out of Africa, should have, like, these people or this thing that we're finding shouldn't be here at this time. So I think there's definitely some legitimate questions, and I'm coming into this thing cold as far as your work, Bruce, but I'm looking forward to reading your books. Very interested to hear. And
also, we have followed pretty closely a lot of the quote unquote anomalous finds in the Americas of much more ancient peoples. Like, Kyle and I think I would say that we focused our study on Younger Dryas period and afterwards, in terms of the human origin story, because that's what, we're looking at this more recent period. So when you take it all the way back to 780,000 years, I'm like, okay,
yes,
this is way more interesting. And there are finds in the Americas that are too old. The Clovis first model has been destroyed, basically. I mean, there are some people that are still clinging to it, but there are plenty of finds here that I think ruin that story for them.
Absolutely.
So Bruce, let's just wrap up this into Africa, out of Africa. What are we kind of leaving out of the table, leaving off here that people should come to understand through your work that's important to the bigger story?
One thing I suppose is it kind of reminds us that if we're talking about where does this story start, again, you have to decide, what is a human, what is important to the human story, all these kind of concepts, because if you say, well, where does our lineage start? Well, it starts with a single-celled organism 4.5 billion years ago, in the ocean somewhere. So, I mean, where do we trace to? Where do we start, right, in the human story? So if you are taking it just from the genus Homo, then that appears to emerge first in Africa. But then if you trace it back to, earlier hominins, some of those appear to be in the Mediterranean region now. They're finding fossils that suggest perhaps the earliest hominins might have been there. And if you go back to when was the first kind of primates and stuff, they're tracing these back down into East Asia and the jungles there. So there is a degree of where do you want to start the story, right? Now, if we're dealing with Homo sapiens, then that's where I say that, I argue that their story begins 780,000 years ago. So again, so someone can sort of, you can kind of say, well, where are you starting this? And that's important to where we are looking geographically and what kind of human we're looking at, right? So it does shift. And I think the out of Africa and the greater evolutionary story kind of informs us of that timeline, that narrative. But then we have to choose from it what is important. And obviously the newer book really is a focus more on Homo sapiens and our story.
Yeah, so that's where we should go. I don't want to hold back or bury the lead here. Tell us about the shift to 780,000 years ago and why you think that needs to be taken seriously, how you originally kind of came to even entertain the idea, and then specifically, and that's what we really tried to capture in our previous interview on Skeptiko and in this new release of 780,000, is how you proved it. Because you went about proving it, as in NASA documents, archaeological finds, published work. You proved it in that way. So tell us the big picture there.
Yeah, I mean, well, one of the interesting things that happened, and again, this is all quite recent, it's funny how sometimes synchronous events flow, because until very recently, the last few years, it was understood that Homo sapiens emerged around about 400,000 years ago, something like that we split off from Neanderthals and Denisovans. But then they found the oldest DNA ever from any humans, which came from a site in Spain called Cima de los Huesos, the pit of bones. And they managed to get a sample of DNA that was about 430,000 years old. It turned out that was from an early Neanderthal ancestor. And really, it was so far along the evolutionary route to becoming a Neanderthal, as we'd understand, that it pushed back the split between Neanderthals, us, and Denisovans, all the way back to at least 550 to 750,000 years ago. So it was a massive rewrite. Since then, there's been other studies. There's a comparative study of different craniums and jaws, teeth, that's pushed it to around 900,000. And some DNA sampling of Denisovans suggesting 800,000. I mean, some of these dates are never absolutely precise. They give you a range. But in the middle of these ranges, you keep coming to around this 800,000. And now that ties in nicely with the cranial finds that we already had in the record, which showed that around 800,000 years ago, the human skull.
Hold on, though, Bruce, hold on, because we are kind of burying the lead on people. And I get that you can't tell the story and we're trying to squeeze it down. But you started with 780,000 because you were told. I mean, this information was passed to you again, and as Russ said, in a way that we're not comfortable with, because it gets into the metaphysical and the psychic and the stuff like this, and it gets into connection with Altrianga objects that somehow have an ability to communicate, all this kind of crazy stuff. I think you immediately go to the science stuff, because we love that. We all love that. We want to hear that you can back it up. But we are kind of bearing the lead, because you started with this information whispered in your ear, if you will, that said it all started 780,000 years ago. Now you, Bruce, need to go prove that. And you did.
Yeah, that's the interesting. Yes, I suppose you could say it's down the other way. So I'm giving you what's happened since we got that date. The funny thing, science has come in to match it. But you're right, that we already had a date that we were looking at. And at the time, when that information, the idea that there was events 780,000 years ago coming to us via an interaction between an individual in Australia named Valerie Barrow and an artifact, which is considered to be a highly sacred artifact of the Arente people, language group that is centered around Central Australia, Uluru, some of the regions around there, that they have these artifacts which their own law says are embodiments of beings from the first time, the creation time, the Alteringa time, that these are literally living entities in a form that will persist against time and wear, and that they took on those forms in that creation time, and that these carry information down through the ages, and they are usually, revered. They're kept in caves. They're kept away from people. They can only be handled by the elders, what they call clever fellas, basically what we'd think of as shamans, who are the only people who can interact with these because they're so highly sacred, but possibly for other reasons, may even be dangerous. I mean, there's an indication that a lot of people be scared of these. They wouldn't really want to go near them. Now, I suggest that this could be something like a Bracewell probe, which is an extraterrestrial technology, which would be left on a planet.
Okay, hypothesized kind of sci-fi idea that, hey, if you're going to explore space, what you might do is just shoot these probes out there, have them land, and then come to life and wake up and, echo, tell me what time it is kind of thing. And this is kind of like that, because it starts spewing out all this information about what's going to happen in the world and what you need to do. And then it starts working your way into your dreams and into Danny, your wife's dreams and other interactions. And you have this in 780, you tell about where you're almost brought to tears by the fact that what you're finding is matching what you've had these visions of for so long. So it's, again, this blending of the science with this extra extended consciousness kind of input that you're getting, which really is so fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was years before, in 2002, around 2002, that I'd had an experience doing a sort of shamanic journey, altered state journey, in which I'd experienced myself as being an entity, a tall humanoid entity on a craft coming towards the Earth, knowing that there'd been some kind of an event in which a lot of other fellow beings had been destroyed, feeling that as though being there, not like, a conventional memory, but experiencing it, that you're there, it's you, this is happening now, that you're aware of what's just happened, and all of that. And that lasted probably for a couple of minutes at most. Now, I had no context for it, this is 2002. And then all these years later, sort of in 2013, I first became aware of this story, from Valerie Barrow in her book, through some research in Australia. Just to clarify, that her work was published in 2003, around the time that I was having that experience, funnily enough. So it may even be the same sort of time that she was writing the book, which is kind of intriguing. And that meshed up with the information in her book, that there was these beings in craft coming down from this exploded mothership. So a lot of beings had died. Even the clothes I was wearing meshed up to the descriptions in her book. So it was bizarre. Now, you could classically say, past life memories, but at the same time, I'm also aware that, you could explain that in other very strange ways. Is there an alien technology hacking into people's brains? Is there a spiritual entity that telepathically telling people this? You can go down lots of wormholes, but the bottom line is it was a very extraordinary experience, which then linked to information I wouldn't be privy to for another decade or so. And it turns out that beyond that there's actual evidence that supports both of these accounts. So, it's an extraordinary flow of information and events.
Well, Bruce, we want to invite you to our podcast to do a series of shows with us if you want. I really want to dig into this. I've got a whole list of notes that I don't think we're going to be able to get into any of them today. So
Sure. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, we can do separately and more.
Yeah.
Your specific questions.
Well, excellent. So let's do this then. Bruce and I did, I thought, a great interview. I really, really loved it. And a lot of people who listened thought it was great too.
Yeah.
And the whole reason for doing the 780, although it didn't come out exactly the way we had planned, Bruce and I had planned, is to give people much more background and depth. So, you know what I might do right now is just pause for another second, play another clip.
Yeah.
And I apologize if it's somewhat disjointed or if it moves us too far in the story, but I'll play a clip from the 780,000 movie, and then we'll hear from Bruce next. Sound okay, guys?
Cool.
Now, of course, there's a much bigger story here, and credit to Valerie, she details all of that in her book, which people can read. But my interest was in these major events because I felt there was the potential to be signatures in the geological records and in academic papers that I could go away and look for evidence of this. Suddenly, I had an understanding of a whole series of synchronous events in my life going back years. Now, going all the way back to the events in around 2002 when I'd had this shamanic journey experience where I'd seen an alien craft basically coming in towards the Earth.
Now, Bruce, you just talked about that, so I'm going to maybe cut it off there and say, maybe you could give folks a high-level recap of what you thought you might be able to prove, so we can get in and talk about Tektites,
sure,
the meteor attack or meteor thing, and then the genetics part of it at a high level, and then we can start diving into that.
Sure. So, from the event that we just discussed already with what I had happened to me, see that you could say influenced me to take more seriously Valerie's accounts in terms of what was in her book, which is that there is a craft that comes here, a crystalline craft, which is destroyed in orbit, vast, not talking like a little tiny flying saucer. This is said to have had 50,000 beings on board, very large craft with smaller craft on board. It's destroyed in orbit. There is there's a few that survive. They come down, that they are involved in genetically modifying existing hominins on this planet to sort of upgrade them, if you like. And at 5 years later, that there is a event involving a multi-directional asteroid impact of this planet that is engineered by extraterrestrials. Now, these were three, obviously radical and enormous kind of impactful events in our history if they were real. So they stood out to me as being potentially provable, in ways that most things aren't. If someone says that there was a being and he did this, he did that. Okay, you're not going to find the bones. You're not going to find the evidence of that. If there's something on a big scale, something exploding in orbit, meteorites impacting, modification of the genome, those three things stood out to me as being potentially evidential.
So one of the things we talk about a lot in the film is this Tektite thing. And maybe you want to tell people a little bit about the high level and then get into the details of what is a Tektite and why it was a real mystery. It was a mystery in science in general before you even decided to look into this. And then what is the mystery surrounding them? Why is it so important to this story?
Yeah, absolutely. To be honest, in some respects, the Australite mystery, is deserving of a whole analysis on its own, irrespective of any stories about, visitations and genetic engineering or any of that, because you have there a event which has been known to science for 100 years, not explained away, despite all kinds of teams of, geologists and physicists and NASA engineers, all sorts of people who've thrown their minds at this, because we have something that's happened 780,000 years ago. It's been well dated. We have this creation of this material, this Australite Tektite, spread all across this vast region from Antarctica up to southern China, in this absolutely huge, enormous debris field, right, which does not mesh with any known previous impact events. We have impacts of meteorites and asteroids and stuff throughout history. We don't see this kind of debris field. We also have this mysterious material, which not only is it quite clearly a kind of this glass-like tektite, but in some instances you have it in these button forms where it definitely has traveled through the upper atmosphere and entered into our atmosphere and had secondary melting on its way down. Now that again,
they actually look kind of like little flying saucers.
They do, ironically. Yes, they do.
And it's not even so ironic when you break it down, which you do just beautifully. You explain the chemistry of it and how that happens.
And the aerodynamic forces. So but that is shaped. So again, if you think of a craft design, like a nose cone of a rocket, it is dealing with the aerodynamic forces of entering our atmosphere. So that's why we see this. And so again, if you're looking at spaceships, whether human or extraterrestrial, there's probably some sense to the fact you see these kind of shapes. Because again, if you're entering atmospheres, in a conventional sense, that you would have aerodynamic shaping.
Yeah, and there's another interesting thing about them is that they had a 2-stage shaping process that you sort of detail in the book. That like they appear to have started out as spheres, you know, and a crystalline sphere can't form on the ground in the sense that it won't be a sphere. You know, liquid spheres form in space in a 0G environment. And then it has a secondary shaping process, which is the reentry part, where the sphere is sort of reshaped into this aerodynamic shape. And even you were saying in the book that NASA studied some of these shapes to make their reentry vehicles because they were set up for the reentry, you know, affecting the atmosphere. That was really interesting.
My understanding is that, they sort of realized these teams that were involved in designing these vehicles, they obviously noticed the similarity.
Yeah.
This is a kind of, looks like it has that look of having entered the atmosphere. So they were very intrigued and very interested. That's how NASA sort of got involved with it. And there's been various NASA-associated studies of australite tektites by different people that have basically concluded that, it has to have come from a source body that was in orbit, that was superheated in some way, you know, reduced to a molten liquid glass, and that then cools into these spheres, as you said, and that then as these enter, and they have to enter quite slowly at a fairly gentle angle, that they can't, you know, they don't come in fast and hot like we have with meteorites and asteroids, that these have to come in at a fairly gentle angle, and that's why we have the time for secondary melting and the running of a liquid glass to the back, forming these shapes. Anything that comes in very, very fast and at a steep angle, what happens instead is you have the evaporation of the surface layers at extraordinary heat from the friction, and that just evaporates off. You don't really get much liquid. That liquefaction process can't really happen unless you have a gentle, slow entry. So that
ties into what you're just mentioning there, Bruce. And I don't want to gloss over it because there's like a million points here. We can't possibly cover them all today, folks. But this idea of an orbiting object, which is really strange because, again, I didn't know this stuff. I learned it from you. But you can't have an orbiting object that doesn't fit the profile of a spacecraft. I mean, nothing else, I'm saying that backwards, but nothing else fits that profile of an orbiting object quite as nicely as this large crystalline object you're talking about.
Yeah, essentially you have to get into extraordinary mathematical odds for the Earth to capture any significantly large body. You know, it's so unlikely that, you know, in many mainstream sources I looked at, they just discount it. You know, others say that, you know, it's just within the realms of possibility if something came in at exactly the right angle, the right size. You know, there's so many considerations. So essentially, we don't expect this to happen. That we have very small objects, car-sized asteroids and things like that, which do get captured, and respectively large planets like Jupiter and Saturn, they sometimes capture larger asteroids and comets temporarily, usually, which then fly off. But Earth, it's not expected to happen. So it was quite extraordinary to find that, you know, again, which points to that we have something very unusual just in the fact that a large body is now orbiting the planet. And then it turns out that the content, the silica, is too high at around 75, 80%. We find that asteroids are limited to about 60%, that we don't know of any natural bodies out there that are over 60% silica. So when you start putting these kind of factors together, you have this very unlikely object, which is now in orbit, you know, and precisely the same time as we have a line of extraordinary events, you know, a magnetic pole reversal, the emergence of Homo sapiens, an asteroid bombardment. It's like, what is going on once you start factoring that in?
And just to pull back the lens even further, we're talking about, I mean, a geological event here that is in a scale that we're looking at millions of years. So like, I mean, science is looking at millions of years and saying, okay, we've seen these different things fall from the sky, and they're going, wow, but this is the only time we can see something exactly like this that has ever happened in this particular place, only once. And it happened at exactly this time that we were looking for. I mean, I don't think, well, how did that strike you guys in terms of being extraordinary or being, well, show me more?
No, this part about the Tektites, The fact that, it's the objects seem to be moving too slowly, like he was saying, to be a normal cometary or asteroidal body impact. Those move really quickly. When they come into the atmosphere, number one, they don't start out molten. That's one point. Number two, they come in so fast that a lot of times, depending on the angle of impact, they're only in the atmosphere for a couple of seconds before they make landfall.
What about the fact making landfall? What about the fact that there's no crater?
Yeah, there's no,
because as Bruce points out, later, is that anything, when you start talking about things this size, and then you go over to Laos, where we start seeing these bigger objects, and they're huge, they're 20 kilograms, but there's no crater. And Bruce, didn't you say that that we would estimate the crater to be like dinosaur extinction size thing?
Yeah, it was either 40 kilometers or 40 miles across, so like a vast sized, and because it's supposed to be young, it's 780,000 years. Obviously, we can find impact sites from millions and millions of years ago. So this was really problematic, and it's been, a head scratcher for the geologists
Well, it just fits perfectly with your theory, right? It's if it's a spacecraft that was blown up in space, there's no crater. It's all this little debris that's thrown around. Versus if it's a big rock up there, it comes down and it slams into the earth. But I'm sorry, guys, I kind of cut it off a little bit short. What else did you think about that and or the crater?
Well, I really think the idea is awesome, but my brain immediately goes into trying to figure out how it could not be aliens, right? So
that's right. You should.
It's just what happens. And I'm imagining, well, there could have been a scenario where there was an impact, which is extremely unlikely, between two cometary or meteorite or meteor objects near the atmosphere at their closest approach to Earth to slow them down and also melt them to create your initial molten spheres that then fell slowly into the atmosphere. That doesn't necessarily explain the high silica content, but it could explain a very unlikely scenario of slow entry of pre-molten and then solidified spheres that were out in space and then fell down and remelted upon entry.
Yeah, and the Tektites,
and there would be no crater. There would be no crater in that sense.
Bruce.
Well, again with the idea about capturing a body in space, there's always these like infinitesimally small chances of things happening, right? But what we can look at there is that none of the scientists who spent the 100 years on this propose that as a possible solution. So one would assume that that's because of when you put all the evidence together, that would remain problematic. Again, apart from the odds of these two objects happening to hit. So if we think about the size of space, and we think about how unlikely it would be for two relatively small objects in space to hit and just happen to hit in the upper atmosphere of our planet, and then does the distribution pattern fit with that? And as you said, if it's two different bodies, we'd almost expect to have some of the material that would be different, would have some of the different components. Because if you have some of the original body A, body B, body A should be a different composition to body B. What you find with Tektite is it's very homogeneous, that throughout the entire mass of this material that's being found is almost identical in composition throughout. Now, that's problematic for for that scenario, but also for the impact, because what you expect in a really fast kind of singular explosion event, that you should, particularly impacts, that you should have some of the material that is only partly melted or is of different compositions. Like if you're impacting some granite and sandstone, that some parts will have more granite, some parts have more sandstone, some parts are partly melted, some aren't. So again, if you have two objects here, you would expect to be able to detect the presence of two original source bodies. So some parts remaining from part A and part B. Right. So again, because of the homogeneity of the material, that really points to being just an object superheated, not encountering material from other objects, whether the Earth, the Moon, or another body. So that's where it becomes problematic. And also, in fact, this homogeneity, especially the lack of bubbles, it turns out there's this whole thing called, I think it's Moses law or something like that. Where basically that if you're creating a glass and you want to remove all the bubbles, like when we're producing glass, that you have to have a kind of sustained event, that you heat the glass for a while, and that refines it down to this homogeneous material with very few bubbles. And it's pointed out that, in fact, with this glass material, that we have that. And so now this is problematic because in an impact, you have a singular moment of extreme energy, extreme heat, extreme pressure, and that's it. That's not how we form homogeneous glasses. They're energized over time. And now we're told in this original material that this ship is being hit with a sustained energy beam that is superheating it and is essentially melting it and blows it apart, and it turns into this homogeneous glass. So that's, again, this is a funny factor that's been pointed out by some of the scientists. It shouldn't be homogeneous like this if it's a singular, just, impact explosion. We shouldn't see this. We should see a lot of bubbles and see a lot of part melt and things like that. So that, again, there's a lot of science that suggests we have something extraordinary happening.
Yeah, or it could have been heated from within the spaceship from whatever energy drive it had that overheated.
It explodes. There's a nuclear explosion at the end. After this.
I want it to be a crystal spaceship. I'll just tell you straight up, but I can't help
don't want it to be.
You don't have to want it to be. That. No, like I say, if there's a way to explain it another way, but I said this is problematic because then you need what can be a sustained energy event that other than this. Because if impacts don't explain it, what are we left with? Solar flare or something hitting this?
Yeah,
we had to find something, a mechanism that could continually heat this body to make this homogeneous, nearly bubble-free glass.
Yeah, and the other idea, the standard model idea for Tektites is that they're post-explosion, that they're actually supposed to be a mixture of the impactor and ejecta.
Exactly.
And this
see this part melt.
Right, and so like you were saying, this material doesn't fit that profile because it would, like you said, it would be a mixture of all this different stuff, and it's actually too homogeneous for that. So it is interesting.
It's quite extraordinary.
Yeah,
in that sense. And not just the australite tektite. There are 4 other strewn fields, and these are problematic. I don't go into them in the book, but keep in mind that the whole history of the planet, there's only like 4 of these strewn fields.
That's right.
Now, what the hell's going on there? Because if these are just from standard impacts, then why are there not hundreds and hundreds of these sites with these? So again, you could probably dive into the backstory of some of these others. I haven't, but I do suspect that they're all in some way extraordinary. But the reason why we can focus on this one in particular is because it's unique in that we have these tektite buttons that are quite clearly come down from space. So then it's not the same as the other strewn fields.
Hey, so Bruce, that is like, we had just talked so long, and that's why it's really cool. If you guys do have Bruce on for a series of interviews, I think that would be fantastic because that's really what this topic deserves, especially for folks like all of us who are interested in the science. And again, the key part of this story is it has this incredible extended consciousness aspect to it. But then what we're trying to do in our humble little minds here is tie it back to this science. And I can't let go of this. There's 4 fields, 4 times when we've seen this kind of tektite event. And you're talking about just one of them. What is the range of those different ones? And you've already explained why this one is unique. But I guess I want to drive home this point that of all the events we've ever traced on the history, geological history of our planet, of all the different craters and all the stuff that's done into it, this is unique and it's over what scale of time? It's not just like they just looked for the last, how big of a scale can they go back and look for all this stuff?
Yeah, some of them go back. I think with the Moldavite, it goes back, it's certainly in the tens of millions, I think, if not longer. There's another strewn field, I think an African strewn field, which is around 1 million years old. And some have suggested that perhaps it's closer to the dating on the australite than that. Maybe it's within the same frame, but they think around about 1 million years old. So that's the second youngest. And then you've got Moldavite, and you've got a US site as well, which I forgot where.
Yeah, it's in Georgia.
There's another in Georgia.
Yeah, the piece of it that's exposed that we know about is in Georgia. Yeah.
And so that one, I think, is again going back quite early.
Yeah, that one's really old, I think. Yeah.
So it's only these 2 that are fairly recent, the African and the Australasian.
So again, you get the little echo machine, and the Aboriginal Australian people have their ancient echo, and it comes out and says, "Hey, look, guys, it's 780. Look for it." And boom, you find it right to the date. You don't find it 10 million years ago, 5 million years ago. You find it, boom, and that is unbelievably needle in a haystack thing, and it's just easy to kind of lose the big picture here.
Well, yeah, that, and of course, and then very briefly mentioned, there's a claim that there is a multi-directional asteroid bombardment of the planet 5 years later. So now in geological terms, you can't pinpoint 5 years difference. So you would be looking for an event approximately in the same 10,000, 20,000 years, right? Because we're not quite at the pinpoint accuracy.
Right.
But, it turned out that in 2016, a team of German geologists had stumbled on evidence of a multi-directional asteroid bombardment. And keep in mind, this book, the source material is published, so it's in the public record from 2003. This multi-directional impact is discovered in 2016. Now, you can't then say, well, this person's heard about it, they've woven it into a sci-fi story. You just can't do that. And it turns out that when does this event happen? Approximately the same time as the Australites. So they give it a little bit of leeway each site, because there's about 4 different impact sites they found, and they're close enough in their geological dating that they believe they happened at the same time. Now, you've got impacts down in Tasmania, impacts in Central America, and impacts a couple other sites, and they are sure that these basically are, interrelated.
Yeah, this might be going a little too deep into the story here, but this part bothered me in the story that was being told. So the ship shows up, it's destroyed. Some people survive. They end up on the ground. They start trying to live there. I guess they sent out a distress call.
Oh, really?
And then 5 years later, people show up and they start bombarding the planet, and there are survivors on the planet. I'm like, wait a minute. Why would they do that? I know this is probably not something that can be answered, but this part of the story bothered me. I wondered why when they asked for rescue that the people show up and then start slamming the planet with asteroids. That you can't.
They don't want rescue. That's sort of clarified in the book. They don't want to be rescued. They are offered to be rescued.
That's right. But
this is more like an enforcement of the original agreement for another group to leave the planet.
Yeah.
But there is a communication between them. So although it's never completely explained, we assume that there is some level of defense of locations where these other survivors are.
Yeah,
because they are in communication, but there's no attempt really to go into depth of this is how we we put them in a particular area. It doesn't really explain it. But one has to infer that in this communication between them, where they say we want to remain, that they would be protected from this bombardment.
Yeah, they would have to tell them, like, okay, you need to go hide because we're about to start throwing asteroids at the planet you're on.
We won't hit you here, but we're going to be blowing a lot of the planet to bits.
That's right. Yeah, because go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. No, you go ahead.
Yeah. Well, we've been like I was saying, we've been studying the Younger Dryas period, specifically the impact hypothesis about the Younger Dryas, and a bombardment, even of small material, even the stuff that just explodes in the air that doesn't always make it all the way down to the ground, causes extinction level events. Yeah. You don't have to have it.
Cataclysmic.
Yeah, it's cataclysmic for the whole planet. So
absolutely. It's theorized that even with one of the objects that hit in Antarctica it's believed it left an initial crater in the ice about 200 miles by 200 miles, 200 kilometers by 200 kilometers.
Oof.
I'd have to check. But you think of that, and they think that was an object on the same scale as the one that eradicated the dinosaurs.
Yeah.
This is not a small impactor, right? And that's just one of them. And there's several that are impacting. And it was theorized that the only reason why that didn't cause the same level as extinction event is because it was in ice, and because the world was in an ice age at that time. So there was a lot of sea ice, and that absorbed a lot of the energy. And so now if these impacts were happening at a point when there wasn't so much ice, like now, that we would have had an event like the dinosaur extinction event. But it still was severe. They think that these multi-directional impacts caused firestorms, earthquakes, tsunamis. So by no stretch was it, a cakewalk.
Right.
It would have been there would have been mass extinction type events, in some areas, definitely.
I would just like to make a comment about the story and its similarities to some translations and interpretations of the Sumerian text of the Anunnaki coming down, Enki genetically altering the hominids that lived on the planet to make the Adamu. And then you have another story that comes much later, which is the quote unquote fallen, which are like Shemyaza and the 200 fallen angels that come down, take the daughters of men to be their wives. And then they don't want to leave, but it was against the compact with the gods or God. And so then there's like a battle ensues between them where God destroys all of them. That's just really interesting to me. So.
There are similarities for sure across.
There are, and you find them elsewhere as well. I know you say there's some elements of this in the Bible stories, again, which relates to the Sumerian stories anyway. But
yes.
Now, this is problematic if you take it from a very mundane, materialist, conventional view, particularly if you take a view that there's not been contact events with other extraterrestrials over time. Otherwise, it's quite easily explainable why we have similarities in these different stories, because if either of one of two or both of these other scenarios are true, then it's explainable. One being the very common claim that many people, particularly shamans, mediums, and whatnot, can have psychical communication with non-human extraterrestrials, that have this information, and it keeps being perpetually renewed, right? Then immediately you can see how this stuff perpetuates through time and space. The second one being, of course, direct contact, which again, vast numbers of people, whole civilizations claim that they've been in contact, whether, Native Americans, Aboriginal people, all sorts of people said, we've had ongoing contact. They tell us history. They tell us stuff. Some of them say we go and sit in the bush, meditate, get contact with the star people, and they tell us stuff. Right. So in either of those scenarios, there's no problem. Of course, if you go from a totally materialist view that people can't do that, then you're stuck scratching your head. How can the Sumerians know this story from 780,000 years ago? How could they have any indication about modification of human beings? Why is that story so persistent? Why is it the Native Americans are talking about that we have ancestry to the Pleiades? Where's this coming from? Now, even if it's even a real event, 780,000 years is too long for this to be oral history. Right? It's too long.
Okay. Yeah.
It's not believable that you can pass down an accurate story for 780,000 years, particularly when those first generation don't have the complex brain that we have. There's no reason to think that they were capable of really doing that, right? Having that whole story and conveying it.
Yeah.
So the only way you can have this is either someone is tapping into this information in some kind of psychical way, or there's a direct contact, there's a landing, there's a refreshing of the story through that.
Which is basically what the Sumerians were claiming, is that the Anunnaki came down and told them all this stuff.
Contact.
So, I mean,
exactly, that they had contact.
You either take them at their word or
these direct contacts. All sorts of cultures have stories. If you accept the very many stories of direct contact or psychical interaction, either of those explain that straight away. Why we're hearing the similar story, that the Sumerian story seems almost like the slightly Chinese whispers version of what I'm providing in my book. It's not quite right. It's probably written down after the events, right? So
that's what I keep hearing in all this is, the whisper to your neighbor, telephone game, but I tell you what, guys, we're running out of time. And really, I think one of the purposes of this show was to kind of make this introduction, because I'm really, really hopeful that you guys will do this series. And you can already see, I think the audience can already see that the brothers, the snakes, they ain't gonna they ain't gonna roll over. Not that snakes roll over. I don't know how snakes do that, but they're not gonna roll over on this. They're gonna dig into it and they're gonna try and pull it apart. And if anyone remembers the first interview that I did, that's how I framed it up, because that's really what I do. I was like, no, I'm pulling this guy down. I'm pulling this Bruce Fenton. He's going down. And I tried the best I could. So this is like a passing of the baton to people who are more capable. Pull it apart, tell us where it's wrong. But I tell you what I'm going to do, because we got like 5 minutes and Bruce has to run. And I want to play one more clip from the movie.
I also want to leave people with something too. So go ahead, but I have a few things to say. Won't take me a minute though.
Okay. No, do you want to do it before or after this clip?
I have one thing. I would say if you're going to be a materialist, and if you're going to throw out the possibility of contact, then you're not going to solve any mysteries about our origins. So that's my opinion. So
go ahead and play the clip, Alex. I'll do this after that's over.
Oh man, now you got me worried. You kind of seem very confident there that you got something you're holding under your hat. Okay, here, I'll play one more clip and then we'll see what you have to say.
Having validated that there was not only a large crystalline object in orbit, just as this information had stated, and having found that there was indeed a multi-directional asteroid bombardment, as the information had stated, I now was in a position where I had to look at perhaps the most controversial and most important claim in this information, which is, of course, that Homo sapiens are tied to this story, that these beings, this intelligence, goes on to make a modification in the early hominins that are living on the planet at this time. Could this also be true? Now, I was in a fortunate position, having already written a book, The Forgotten Exodus, which tackled human evolution, the early migrations, and the story of these archaic hominins. I was aware that there were anomalies in that narrative already, and had quite a familiarity with the academic literature. So one of the things I already knew was that in just the last few years, that story has majorly shifted.
Okay, so we might end that right there. And there's so much, obviously, that we could talk about in terms of the genetic modification. And it's incredible. I think people already get a sense for the depth that Bruce goes into in his research. And I guarantee you he's done that with the genetic information too. Not that you would believe it or have to believe it, but let me, as we wrap it up, let me toss it over to you, Russ, and tell me what you're thinking.
Okay, so going through the book, I was really, two things happened to me in the Gosford glyphs part. One, I was sort of confused by what was happening there. Obviously, there was some stuff. You guys go there, and then there's a lot of visions and intuitive stuff that's happening, right? Which was all interesting. The other thing that was really fascinating to me is that I've looked into this a lot. I don't know if you're familiar with Ben from Uncharted X. He's done a lot of work on this. He's gone there multiple times. He is Australian, but he lives in California, but he's been there. He has a whole video on it. There's a couple of guys, one of them's named Yusuf. They're Egyptians. And they have taken, they've taken these glyphs and they've got a whole series of videos on their YouTube channel, and they've published a paper about their translations. So what was interesting to me, the part that was strange, was they're looking at the glyph types and saying, well, these look to be from this particular late period of Egypt. But the story they are translating from those glyphs, I got a couple of the lines here from their translations. Here's one of them. The ships capsized, they turned over and were destroyed into pieces. We prayed to our gods for help, but many were killed. God will keep the hidden burial from being reached and give the foreign land heritage, and eternal life to the deceased will be given power in this place. Those are lines from their translation. I mean, they are so close to the story that you're telling. It's very fascinating. So on the one hand, I'm like, okay, they're dating it to this very late period of Egypt. But on the other hand, this story sounds so close to the one that you're telling in your book. And so I definitely want to dig into that more on our show when you come on.
So Bruce, let me just tell you, wrap it up in a couple minutes. So Bruce, we're going to give you the last word here. Tell people, what's going on with the book, where they can find it. I know you're doing a lot of really terrific media appearances as well, and you're continuing to do this research. So tell us in a couple minutes kind of what continues to go on with this work.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, if people would like to, interact with me, I'm on Twitter quite a lot. I try to be available if someone has questions or queries, particularly if they've read the book and they've got some feedback, if they get me on basically Exogenesis HH, my handle there. I'm doing lots of interviews. So people, if they sort of keep an eye on me, Facebook or on there, I'll share some of those links. I might do a kind of follow-up book. We'll see. So I am, looking to see, additional information to this. Of course, if they watch the free documentary on YouTube, it'd be great because they'll get a good overview, from what we've done. But yeah, otherwise the book is available in the US. It's available now. Bookstores. I understand you can order it. Obviously, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. In Europe, the print version will be out, I think, on the 26th of July due to, coronavirus slowing down shipping and all that kind of stuff. But it's available, audio, Kindle, all the other, alleyways, but just not print in Europe at the moment.
Great. Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to wrap it up there. And I hope, we kind of touched on some stuff like we said all along. It's a huge topic, so we can't get into it too much, but hopefully we've maybe made some people interested that didn't know about it before. And it's kind of fun to see you guys coming into it, you know, fresh and clean and some of your perspective. So thanks, guys. And we'll stay on top of this. Bruce, Russ, Kyle, thank you all so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all.
Well, that was our Swapcast with Alex Tsakiris from Skeptiko. It's interesting doing a Swapcast with somebody whose shows are way shorter than ours. So we have a lot of time to fill here. And Bruce is an interesting guy. And I don't know if this will... Well, we'll see. But I have interacted with him in the past, it turns out. And I thought this when I started hearing him on Skeptiko and other places, and I was like, I think this is the same guy, because years and years ago he went on these expeditions into the depths of the freaking jungle in Ecuador and took photographs of these sites that are, like of standard model scarps, or like these are natural whatever, and and he's like, no, look at these gigantic layered stones that are in pyramid shapes that are out in the middle of the jungle. And he wrote some articles about that going on these expeditions at ancient-origins.net. And some of the photos are very interesting. Like the dude's actually following ancient stone roads through the jungle made of, they're taking pictures, and it's got paving stones, and there's like a curb on the side, and they're in the middle of nowhere. And, and then there's really interesting stuff. So he's been kind of doing this for a long time. So it was interesting for me to put those two things together. Like, oh, this is this guy that I have interacted with a long time ago. I mean, I told him that back then I was like, dude, you need to get LiDAR out there. And then he started asking me, well, how do I get LiDAR? And I'm like, I don't know. Call LiDAR, 1-800-LiDAR.
Yeah.
Now I can tell him you just need to get hold of Butt Flapperton. But yeah, it's really interesting stuff. He's been interested in the human origin story for a long time. And like we said in the Swapcast there, I do need to dive into his first book, or the earlier book, Into Africa. So we will probably do that. I will at least do that before we get him on our podcast. But I spent most of my time studying the Exogenesis book and the story that's told in there. And it is an extraordinary story. And I have to be honest, I had a really hard time with the source of this material, And so Kyle and I were talking during the break, like, all right, so he does start out with a target, and that kind of gives you like you're in danger of confirmation bias here.
Yeah, because then you start looking through the scientific literature only for those things that support the possibility that you have in your head, right?
Yeah. So one thing that was confusing to me, like in this, what you guys
I'm not accusing him of doing that, because I haven't dug into his work yet. Just wanted to put that out there.
It's clear from reading the book that he starts with this story. Now, the way that story comes to him is not like, he didn't sit down and read a sci-fi. It's actually him and his wife, and they have multiple there's sort of a lot of lead-ins that they have that are all in the nature of dreams or spiritual encounters, or even, like shamanic journeys, like I would think like ayahuasca type stuff, right? So they are led in this direction, and then they are eventually pointed, and they already have pieces of the idea, and then they're pointed to this book that this woman wrote, and it's. I probably should tell some of this story so people kind of get the idea, but there are objects in Australia that the Aborigines have there called Shirlinga stones. And Kyle and I, as soon as I started reading about this, I'm like, yes, I recognize how this could be an artifact that is actually a technology that has been recognized by people. And they, if it's the Churlinga stone stuff, not the specific one that he's talking about, but just the idea of them, because it's not just one object. This is a thing that Aboriginals know about, reminds me of the Ark of the Covenant, in which there is an actual ancient, powerful artifact that they're all kind of afraid of.
Yeah.
But it becomes involved in their ritual practices, ritual meaning whatever they're doing.
Yeah, it gets quant stuffed in a way over time.
Right. And they're afraid of it. And so what they end up doing is making copies so that none of them have to actually mess with the original, because it's actually dangerous and they're kind of afraid of it. So there's lots of copies all over the place, but they also know that they know the difference between the copies. Right, so they carry the copies around, and they're like, yeah, these are the, but they also call it men's business. It's really interesting, like the way that they have this set up there in Australia. That like there are things that the women do in the spiritual practices that's women's business, and men don't mess with it. Right, and there are lots of sites like the Gosford Glyphs site that we talked about in there. This women's business, in this, they like this is a place it's a sacred site for women. I think there is a men's site there too, but they have their separate things, and there's the matriarchal part and there's the patriarchal part, and the Churlinga stones are men's business. And I wonder if and the men are afraid of these objects, and they don't want to touch them. And I think that may be part of why they're men's business, because they are like, these objects are dangerous, and women are the progenitors of the species. So keep them away from objects that are, I don't know, radioactive or can damage you in some way. Just being near it, like, the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah.
Is like, don't bring your childbearing women near this thing that can completely destroy the body.
Yeah.
Men's business. Really interesting stuff. But so the idea is that somebody comes into the possession of a Churlinga stone, and I really want to dig into this part of the story. I want to find out, because he talks about it in the book, and I'm like, who is this person that brings it? I want to know how much we can track this down. Where did this other person get it? Anyway, this person begins to get this story from the stone itself, from an entity claiming to be housed in this object.
Man, this is sounding really familiar.
Yeah. Yes.
Joseph Smith.
Right. Yeah. So it tells her this story, and this is kind of where Bruce goes with, all of it is targeted at this specific period in time. I guess you could roughly say 1 million years ago, but, somewhere between 900 and 700,000 years ago. Now, that's an enormously wide range of time. Most of our podcast shows here are focusing on the last 12,000 years. So I start thinking about, how hard this is to target something, because we get excited here if something is like, they're like, wow, look how close this is dating to like what Plato said the singing of Atlantis was. It's within a couple hundred years. Well, these dates are so far back that the margins of error are in the thousands and thousands of years. And when you're talking about human development or things that happen with civilizations, 5 years is a big difference.
Yeah.
So it's hard to really pin down, but it is interesting how many. So they get a specific date range, but he basically narrows it down to around 800,000 years ago, 780,000 years ago.
Yeah, but there you go. You can round it off to 800,000 years, and that's 20,000 years.
Right, exactly. 20,000 years is longer than between now and the Younger Dryas. It's just like there's so much time. So the margins of error are huge, and so he's trying to pinpoint and say, when you look at something and you say, well, this happened around 780,000 years ago. Well, around is encompassing a large range of years that often is bigger than the entire span of recorded history.
Yeah.
So that's one of my problems with this. But it is interesting how many things correlate to this date range, I guess you would have to say, within 800,000 years ago. That, and some of them are pinpointed more, like what we were talking about briefly with the DNA changes that happen in Homo sapiens. Those dates, I don't know how, like you were saying, I can't follow it, but I don't know how they do it. But when you read the papers, they're like, okay, 790 something thousand years ago, there was this weird, chromosome fusion that has never taken place before or after. So how do they date those things? I
I'm
don't know.
completely-
Yeah.
Just oblivious to whatever it is. I don't understand it.
Yeah.
Looks too hard to even find out more.
Right. Right. So the end of the Exogenesis book at the, in the last few chapters, he does dive pretty hard into the DNA stuff. It's a lot of very interesting things. Some of it's hard to follow, but the overall impression you get, and it is sourced. He does give you source links to primary source material of where these papers are, where these researchers are saying, look, something happened to the human DNA right in this period that is unprecedented and is unexplained and has almost zero chance of happening by chance.
Yeah.
Now, we've kind of mentioned this on the show multiple times about how there is evidence in human genome that somebody was actually doing some CRISPR type stuff with us a long time ago, and that's another thing he points out, that he's like, look, if you look at the way these chromosomes were manipulated, it is very like the kind of manipulation we do in CRISPR machines now. Mm-hmm. It's something that you can't imagine happening naturally, but we have now done it artificially. So that's all interesting stuff. A couple of things else that I have in my notes that I can tee up for you guys, as Alex says, I want to talk to him about another crashed ship in the ocean. And then now this is, let's see, the human DNA chromosome fusion. We just talked about that. Neoteny. This is a very fascinating part of the book that I was like, okay, we need to really dive into this. The fact that when you compare modern humans to our primate cousins, right? What you would think of as our genetic cousins, primates, that humans, even adult ones, look like their children. We are hairless. We have larger heads, bigger eyes, and this is called neoteny. And so what's interesting is he shows how in primates they develop really fast. Okay. And most mammals do this. We've talked about this before too. Like a horse is born, a foal, and within hours it can walk.
Right.
Right. And it's almost like you look at it and you're like, all right, its head is a little off. Like by the time it becomes an adult, which is like what, a couple of years.
Yeah.
Now a horse only lives 20 years, so you can say, well, it's greatly shrinked. But the interesting thing about, and he kind of went into this. I know I'm skipping all over the place here. He kind of went into the Swapcast, but the skull, the stuff that happens to human skulls around this period is very interesting. And it's around this period where humans apparently started to be born while they were still fetal.
Yeah.
And the only way, and the reason that started to happen, well, we don't actually know the reason, but what was actually going on is adult skulls were actually much larger in proportion to the rest of their bodies, and that would kill the female giving birth. Unless the baby started being born before their skulls were fused together. In other words, when it was still basically a fetus.
Yeah.
So the baby has to now be born
With a malleable skull.
right. No other animals do that.
I didn't know that.
So this is called neoteny.
Well, I mean, there are, some mammals give birth to the babies are still in the fetus, basically.
Yeah. But I don't think that there's a skull thing happening with them. Like, in other words, anyway, he goes into it in the book that this, at least with primates, there's this thing going on where because our humans, there's this period in history where suddenly our brains started getting much bigger, and what they're looking at are adult skulls. Okay,
Right.
So you're looking at an adult skull, and then there's this period where suddenly the cranial area where the brain is expanding massively in a very relatively short period of time. And that has to coincide with humans now being born with skulls that aren't fused together yet, else it wouldn't work. It would kill the female when the baby was being born if the skull was already hard.
Yeah.
So those are two, and when you dive into the genetics, those two things, the fact that brains are getting much larger and the fact that we're being born way earlier, or that the development process is being changed so that we can be born before the skull's hard, so that it doesn't kill the mother, those two things have to happen at the same time. And they're very different genetic things at totally different places in the genome. And it's not really, how did these two quote unquote adaptations take place at the same time?
Yeah.
Now they had to have taken place at the same time. Otherwise we wouldn't be here, because it would have been an extinction level event for the larger skulls to take place without the earlier birth or whatever, however, I don't know if it's earlier, but the longer gestation period where in other words, where the baby is still fetal when it is born, right?
Yeah.
If that wasn't happening at the same time as the enlarging brains, it would have been an ELE for the human race. All the mothers would have died.
But if it happened the other way around, where the genetic change for the being born with still a soft skull happened first, then it wouldn't have had an effect.
Right. Except that the problem is that being born in a fetal stage where the development process is much longer is actually bad for it's how do I put it? It's not a positive development. There's a trade-off, right? Suddenly the child is vulnerable for a way longer time than it would be.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So now, it's only a positive development if both of them take place at the same time.
Right. Yeah, makes sense.
Okay. What other notes? So bombardment period. I had a problem with this in the story, because in the story, this is something that, and I kind of pushed him on this, and he said, well, yeah, you're right. This is, if you've got friendlies on the planet, throwing giant rocks at it is not necessarily something you want to do. So they would have to have had some kind of communication to live in a protected place. I just found that part of the story strange. Why did they throw rocks at the planet where their own survivors are?
Yeah.
I mean, if you've got directed energy weapons, why do you need to throw rocks? Anyway, that may be quibbling.
Well, I'm not familiar with the story yet, so it doesn't even...
Right. Well, okay. So in his story, 5 years after the crystal spaceship is destroyed in orbit, and a few of the people manage to survive land on planet Earth. Planet Earth, they're not suited to it. They don't have any of their equipment they were planning to use, so they're kind of roughing it. A lot of them are still dying. They're not quite suited to the environment.
Yeah.
Okay. 5 years later, their distress call is answered by alliance ships. I don't know how you would call it. Other spaceships that are basically showing up, a police force. They're showing up angry that somebody blew up one of their colony ships. Mm-hmm. And they offer rescue to the people who are still alive that are on the planet who have managed to not die off yet. And those people are like, no, we want to stay. And then the alliance ships start throwing rocks at Earth.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, what? Why would you do that? If you have, high technology directed beam weapons, and you want to, you want to kill off the people who blew up your crystal spaceship in orbit, don't throw rocks at the planet where there are people living there that are your people. You're going to cause an extinction level event. Anyway.
Yeah, unless it was an attack by the same people who destroyed the planet, or destroyed the spaceship in the first place.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I'm just saying, in the story, it's supposed to be the police doing this. Excessive force, cops. Same old story. All right.
It's been going on for 780,000 years.
We got into the Gosford glyphs a little bit. Kyle brought up how this very is similar to the gods as men, the Sitchin stuff, the Sumerian. And then I wanted to talk to him about evil. Who are these evil beings, and what is the story there? And are they still here? And anyway, there's a lot of stuff to dig into, but I'm really fascinated with the Trillinga stone idea, because this is something we have talked about constantly on this show, about how if there was, now in this context, it's an alien artifact, but we've talked about it in the sense that, like, if there was an advanced civilization on the planet a long time ago, there may be advanced artifacts from advanced human civilizations that have survived into modern times as sacred objects that are feared and worshipped.
Well, going back to the crystal spaceship thing, this... once again, there's an assumption that it's aliens, right?
That's true.
And this may come from because there's a quote unquote record in geology of the types of life forms that were here, and nobody's assuming that any of those fossils were intelligent beings.
Right.
So that if anything highly intelligent and technologically advanced that long ago shows up in space and starts doing stuff and attacking certain people, that they must be from a different planet. But that's still not necessary.
Yeah. That's right. And I'm worried that, I'm really interested to talk to him about how do you discern, I know
discern what?
How do you discern what you're being told in these contexts?
Oh yeah.
I'm really interested to talk to him about the intuitive stuff or the dream stuff or the shamanic experience stuff, or even the quote unquote communication with this entity that may be housed in this ancient artifact, this Trillinga stone. I want to know how I can be sure that the entity doing the communication is actually in that thing, is actually telling us truths, and not just freaking trolling us like so many other entities seem to do all throughout the history of humans interacting with these kind of things.
Same old custodial BS, basically.
Yeah. It's, they're like, one scenario I can come up with, you were talking about, here's a scenario I can come up with that would explain sort of crystal spheres all over the place, would be two objects exploding in orbit around Earth and then those raining down. Well, one thing I could come up with is that here's a trickster type entity who knows all this stuff about human psychology and geology and other stuff, and he puts together this weird story to send us off on freaking goose chases all over the place, believing in aliens, just because trickster. He's a freaking troll.
There's still a fundamental underlying thing that is something seems to be wanting to keep us from the truth in that scenario.
That's right. Yeah.
In any of them.
Yeah. So it tells a big lie.
Is it a conspiracy?
It tells a big lie using a whole bunch of known facts that, it knows that there are these Tektites strewn all over the place that are crystalline. It knows that something weird happened to the human genome a long time ago. It knows that people believe that these Trillinga stones are ancient artifacts, and that modern humans in the Western context would be inclined to believe that it may be an alien artifact housing an AI. So it tells this story.
Yeah.
That uses all those things it puts together, but it's complete bullshit. How will we know the difference?
And it's the same with statistical analysis. Like you can use statistical analysis and everything that we've discovered so far, looking, with astronomy and studying our cosmic environment, to show how unlikely it would be for two objects to collide right nearby Earth and slow down and create this thing. But then how do you use that same statistical analysis to determine how unlikely it is that an alien race brought a crystal spaceship over here?
I know, yeah.
Right.
I thought the same thing. And I don't want to be seeming to ragging on Bruce when he's not here to defend himself. These are just questions that I hope are going to come up and that we're going to be able to discuss at length in our future series with him, that I think he has basically agreed to do with us.
Yeah, and it's still like the Tektite question to me was, and I did listen to, I didn't make it all the way through his interview on Skeptiko, but that's where I was basically at.
Yeah, that was a really interesting stuff. That's really interesting stuff.
And yeah, I'm like, that's a really good point, that these things, why are there only a few of these when we've been being bombarded by impactors for billions of years or whatever?
Yeah. Another question that immediately came up with to me was, he's trying to say, well, look, there's no known crater for these Tektites. And yet at the same time, he's saying, well, there's this known bombardment period that happened right at the same period. I'm like, well, wait a minute. You can't have both of those. You can't tell me that there's no known craters for this strewn field, and yet right at the same time you're finding that there's evidence of a bombardment. Like, okay, there are craters at this same period.
Yeah, and if the object broke up, then you would have a lot of... But again, I immediately with that was thinking of, once again, a cometary tail or a cometary bombardment, not asteroid impact.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, the lines between asteroids and comets and whatever
get more blurry every day.
Yeah, but still, you have an asteroid or a cometary tail, And of course, it's a conglomeration of a bunch of different stuff. So there is a possibility that you would have a high silica content object that creates a tektite field
Yeah.
during a massive bombardment of a bunch of things. And that changes your statistics, right?
Yeah.
That one piece might be a big chunk that was
crystal,
that stayed together
Right.
in the comet breakup.
Yep.
But yeah, it's this is freaking cool. I can't wait to dive into it with the guy.
Yeah.
It's gonna be fun.
Yeah, what is overall broadly, I would say it's a very interesting story. And then he's also dug up a lot of very interesting correlations that dive way deep into like actual very recent science in some cases, some things that haven't been found out until like 2016. And the story that he starts with was being told a long time before any of those new discoveries have come about, right? So that's interesting, and he was trying to make that point kind of like, okay, here we have this 2016 paper, this 2018 paper that's showing this stuff that wasn't known. This is brand new. And yet look how it correlates to this story that was told in 2002 or earlier. So obviously this woman this woman and his wife who are sort of getting these downloads, he calls them, this information over time and through strange synchronicities. They're not writing sci-fi based on known science. Now, on the other hand, I also think of things like the Titan book. Sometimes how weird, like somebody will write a fiction story and then it turns out that it matches so closely to something that happens in real life later.
But we always ask that question is like, what are these synchronicities?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I want to kind of talk to him about, there's this weird transhumanism / spiritual stuff that's going on in his book that kind of confused me. I'm like, wait a minute, which side of the line do you fall on here? Because he's talking about entities who can upload themselves into basically a silica-based environment, like, where they're this is transhumanism. Like eventually we'll be able to upload our consciousnesses into computers. But at the same time, he's turning around and talking about spiritual stuff. And I'm like, wait, are we mixing these things? Where exactly are we going with this? Like if something is making itself eternal by uploading a biological being is making itself eternal by uploading itself into some kind of technology. That's a very materialist scenario of the universe. And I'm confused on where he's like, he kind of is sort of blurring the line of like, am I talking to an AI in this ancient artifact, or is there some kind of spirit thing happening here? Mm-hmm. Maybe it's both. I mean, it could be both. It's possible that both of these things can be true at the same time, that there is a spirit realm and there are souls and there is that kind of stuff.
There are rules and laws governing the ability of a spirit entity to connect its consciousness to a physical object.
Yeah.
Perhaps. And how that physical object can then interact with the physical world around it.
Yeah.
So and maybe if you achieve a situation in the physical world that meets those requirements, then,
Yeah. And there is indication in other ancient texts that this line blurs, that sufficient technological advancement starts to look like, spiritual. It may maybe be couched in the same terms.
Yeah.
This idea of like Osiris slivers, like you can slaughter the god and then put bits of its consciousness into all these lesser beings in order to animate them. Well, that sounds both spiritual and biological robot.
Yeah.
So maybe the line is blurred, and I'm the one wanting it to be black or white on that. So we'll have to talk to him about that too.
Yep. Man, raises a lot of interesting questions.
Yeah.
So yeah,
looking forward to it.
Yep.
Don't know if it's going to start next week, but I hope to start it soon with him. I'm hoping that next week we'll just be doing this next week, and from then until the deep dive is over. But he indicated he might want a little more time, but we'll see. You guys will find out probably right at the same time we do. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that Swapcast. You guys can get a hold of us, brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com. Go to the website, brothersoftheserpent.com. Check out the encyclopedia, the glossary, and the SnakeSkins, which is our merchandise. Support the show with the pyramid scheme, either through Patreon or PayPal. Give us reviews whenever you can on the iTunes store. That really helps spread the show. Share the shows wherever you can. Follow us on Twitter @SnakeBros with no vowels. Join the Facebook group or the Discord. Check out the Library of the Serpent, which is run by Jeff. Links to these are all on the website. Don't forget about History Shift, who makes all of our YouTube videos.
What's up, bro?
Yeah, you can follow him on YouTube and on Twitter. Pod Doodles, who takes some of our podcasts and turns them into videos where you can watch him drawing while listening to the show. Really cool. Thanks to Where Did the Road Go? Uncharted X. I did reference some of Ben's work in this show, the Gosford glyphs. Go check that out if you want more details on that. The translations of those glyphs are fascinating. Micah Maurice's Mind Escape, Grimerica, Conspiranormal, Skeptiko, and the 7 Ages Audio Journal. And all of you listeners out there, thank you guys so much. We love you.
Always have.
Always will.
Good night, Adamo.
Get back to work.
It's still the afternoon.
Snakes!